Welcome, everybody. Good morning to the EOSC National Tripartite Event Germany, hosted by the NFDI, the National Research Data Infrastructure. My name is Jan-Martin Wiarda. I'm a journalist for education and research. The European Open Science Cloud and the NFDI, two communities already with a lot of linkages. And still, their relationship has a lot of potential. And that's what this event is about. NFDI and EOSC connecting the communities. It's about strengthening the ties, talking about the mutual expectations and roles and opportunities for further cooperation. So let's get started. And that means I would like to give the floor to the official opening of the event and to Jörg Sure-Vetter next to me, the director of the NFDI. Professor Sure-Vetter, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction and for the welcome. The exchange of data offers great potential to manage crisis, the crisis you could say, and the crisis of our time, and there are plenty of them. By linking data, exploiting data, and using new technologies such as artificial intelligence, we can gain new insights, create new approaches to solutions, and generate innovations. And we need them fast. The prerequisite for this is to approach data provision and exchange in a more targeted and more structured approach. NFDI and EOSC share the same goals, sharing and reusing research data across disciplinary, across institutional, and across geographic boundaries. In NFDI, valuable data from science and research are systematically accessed, networked, and made reusable in a sustainable and qualitative manner for the entire German science system. The non-profit association, German National Research Data Infrastructure, or in German Nationale Forschungsdateninfrastruktur e.V., based in Karlsruhe, was founded to coordinate the activities in establishing and for establishing a national research data infrastructure. EOSC, at the same time, aims to provide a federated and open multidisciplinary environment for data, tools, and services to be published and reused according to the quite well-known FAIR principles. And in this case, stands for making data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. It builds on existing infrastructure supported by the European Commission, by member states, and by research communities. The EOSC Association, based in Brussels, is the legal entity established to govern EOSC. In order to represent the national interests in the EOSC Association, NFDI and the NFDI Association is the mandated member. And this was given by the German Ministry of Education and Science, BMBF. In this role, NFDI organized today's tripartite event together with EOSC. And therefore, we choose as a title, as you introduced, NFDI and EOSC Connecting the Communities. The aims of the event are to identify what the initiatives have in common, what the mutual expectations are, and what benefits can arise from our fruitful cooperation. I would like to especially thank all the speakers and the spokesperson from the sections and the panelists who will be introduced later by Jan-Martin Wiarda. And especially, I thank Jan-Martin Wiarda to take over the moderation of this event. Thank you for joining this event.
All right, thank you so much, Professor Sure-Vetter. As you know, the EOSC tripartite collaboration are the European Commission, representing the European Union, the EOSC Association, representing the European Research Community, and the EOSC Steering Board, representing EU member states and associated countries, therefore EOSC tripartite collaboration. So the three upcoming keynotes will be delivered by the three partners. Let's start with Germany and the BMBF. The Federal Ministry of Education and Research has played a key role in establishing and financing the NFDI. And what is the link between NFDI and EOSC? What are the common topics? And what's the ground for further synergies from the perspective of the ministry? I'm happy to present to you and to answer those questions will be answered by Mario Brandenburg, the Parliamentary Secretary of State at the Ministry of Education and Science, and the title of his presentation is NFDI as Model and for Contribution to EOSC, the German Political Perspective. Mario Brandenburg, everybody. Welcome.
Yes, hello, and hello, Professor Surewetter, Ms. Panagopoulos, Professor Luyben, and Mr. Wiarda, since I see you on stage. Nice to see you all, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to open today's event, NFDI and EOSC Connecting the Communities. And certainly, it's a quite good occasion to establish this format and to deepen the connections between science and policymakers, as well as between the EU and Germany. But at first, let me talk about the many connections that already exist between the German National Research Data Infrastructure and the European Open Science Cloud. The key idea behind both initiatives was and remains to make research data accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and to enable greater knowledge gains beyond the borders of disciplines, institutions, and geographical boundaries. Research will improve and easier to do as a result, and we will generate new knowledge and enable innovative applications. But nevertheless, the two initiatives have taken different approaches. The core elements of the association, German National Research Data Infrastructure, in short NFDI, is the formation of expert consortia, which basically is organized from a bottom-up approach and coordinated under the umbrella of the association NFDI. And I'm pleased that the NFDI now reflects a comprehensive picture of German research communities with 27 consortia now. And as an open and federated environment, the EOSC links national, regional, and thematic initiatives in an EOSC core and an EOSC exchange, with the FAIR principles, which were mentioned by Herr Surewetter before, common rules, standards, and basically they are central important in this contract. As a part of the federation, the NFDI contributes in a major way to the formation of the European Open Science Cloud. And as I already mentioned, NFDI and EOSC are working towards a common goal, creating data spaces for a scientific community, a web of fair data and digital objects. But a number of similar questions arise in the national and on the European level on the pathway of implementing our vision. First of all, what type of joint cross-sectional services are required to enable a comprehensive sharing of research data? The German answer is a consortium which provides so-called basic services, which is developed by scientists and researchers with a broad range of disciplines. And the actual services of the consortia will be developed in spring 2023. And my hope is for close cooperation with regards to discussions on the European level, and therefore it's highly important that discussion today takes place. The second challenge to be tackled is how do we integrate industry as a user and provider of data and a user of the services we prepare. The aim must be to realize a data space that takes account of interests among researchers to the exchange of data and others with and to the exchange of data basically, but which also enables the industry to find economic value in this data and to join forces. The association NFDI and the Federation of German Industries held a workshop in September, which I as well was happy to join. And we were discussing the principles of fair data spaces on the one hand side and the possibilities of NFDI cooperating, for example, with Gaia-X as a European project as well. So at this point too, it makes sense to exchange best practices and between the EU and Germany. And another issue I would like to mention basically concerns the data literacy. Because besides technical infrastructures and answers and rules, we need people who have the necessary data skills or data literacy, basically. Science and businesses urgently needs professionals with backgrounds who can manage the immense data intense research processes, can do the data management and much more. So the only way we can make meaningful use of all these data resources is if we work together and we join forces. And beyond those three challenges, I have highlighted before, basically, there are different things to fix as well, where we need to find joint European solutions. I don't want to talk a lot about it, but we will discuss legal frameworks like the Data Act and the handling of data in general, data sovereignty, and the mindset of sharing data in general. And I've already mentioned some elements in that, and it's a joint goal from Germany to work together with the European Union and you, the NFDI and the EOSC, to find meaningful ways to work together and collaborate. And therefore, I want to thank you and want to wish you a fruitful discussion in this conversation and to join forces. And from the German side, we're very happy that we can be a part, and we wish all the best to NFDI and EOSC, and we wish you some fruitful discussions, and therefore greetings from Berlin, from the Federal Ministry.
Thank you, Mario Brandenburg, and thank you to Berlin. Ladies and gentlemen, let's move on to the European Commission as partner in the EOSC tripartite collaboration. Anna Panagopoulou is the Director for the European Research Area and Innovation. In her keynote, she will now highlight the federated infrastructure of the EOSC and the idea behind the tripartite partnership. Welcome, Anna Panagopoulou.
Good morning to everybody. Thank you very much, Jan-Martin. I'm very happy to be with you today. Dear Secretary of State, dear Professor Schulvetter, dear members of the research and innovation community in Germany, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a pleasure for me to speak at the first EOSC National Tripartite Event in Germany, and I would like to thank the German Ministry for Research and Education for organizing this event. Today, science is in transition, and this transition affects all aspects of the research cycle. Today, as State Secretary said, we had other challenges, big challenges related also to sovereignty of data that have to be taken also into consideration when at the same time we promote openness of data. So we need to move towards to a culture of openness and collaboration that incentivize research quality, societal impact, and public trust in science. Open science is progressively becoming the norm in modern research, and it represents a culture of shift that will deeply transform tomorrow's environment of today's young researchers. For these reasons, open science, it is of absolutely importance, and open science practices and skills need to be enabled, rewarded, and taught. And this is the central objective of the European Open Science Cloud. The Commission and the Member States have agreed last year on a Pact for Research and Innovation in Europe, which recognizes open science as a priority area for joint action in the Union. As part of the new European Research Area Policy Agenda, 25 Member States, including Germany, 3 Horizon Europe associated countries, and a broad range of stakeholder groups have committed to actively participate in enabling the open sharing of research knowledge and the reuse of research outputs, including through the development of the European Open Science Cloud, the EOSC. And of course, such an endeavor will only happen if we join forces, Commission, Member States, and stakeholders themselves. We are going to be the ones that are delivering the data in an open and fair way. The Commission and the EOSC Association of stakeholders are committed to do the same in the context of the EOSC European Partnership, with a dedicated investments reaching about 1 billion euros by 2030. And very important, the EOSC is also part of the European Strategy for Data, where it is defined as a basis for a science, research, and innovation data space, articulated with other common sectoral data spaces, such as in the health, mobility, and energy. The ERA policy agenda, the European Strategy for Data, and the EOSC European partnerships are concrete means to partner with the EU member states, associated countries, and the research stakeholders, including the EOSC Association and its members, to maintain open science practices across the whole European research area, and to position EOSC as a transverse data space to support thematic data spaces. The tripartite collaboration between the European Commission, the participating states, and the research community was established precisely to engage multiple stakeholders, from ministries, policymakers, and research funders to research performing organizations, service providers, and research infrastructures operators, and the wider research communities across Europe. Last week, the annual EOSC Symposium was organized in Prague, bringing together the EOSC stakeholders to take stock of the many developments and discuss next steps in terms of EOSC developments, capacity building, monitoring, and outreach. The symposium showed increased convergence and collaboration at European, national, and institutional levels, and the three parties in this collaboration are now taking this forward in their planning and commitments to the upcoming years. EOSC success depends very much on our collective capacity to pool our efforts at all levels, institutional, national, and European. We are all providers, but at the same time, the users of the European Open Science Cloud. The developments of the German National Research Data Infrastructures, the NFDI, are of great relevance to the EOSC developments. At the EOSC Tripartite Collaboration event in December last year, we had the honor to discuss this relation with NFDI Director, Jörg Schulweder, and I'm glad to see that this is also the focus of today's event. Such national open science and EOSC events are crucial to inform about EOSC and the national efforts, showcase success stories and best practices by the various communities, and also to help building national EOSC communities and build up new collaborations that align with the EOSC vision, as well as with the national strategies and roadmap. The transformation of science is a shared responsibility and requires the engagement of the research community at large. Research and research organization, of course, are pivotal to these changes. And I'm sure that today's event will pave the way to the coherent advance of the German research area within the context of an open science European research area overall. So with these words, I think that working together will give us the possibility to establish a European federated infrastructure system for data. And I would like to thank you for organizing again the event, for inviting us for this keynote speech, and wishing you a lot of success to your event today.
Thank you, Anna Panagopoulou. Thank you to Brussels. Both the NFDI and the EOSC would be nothing without the researchers and scientists. And within the EOSC tripartite collaboration, it's the EOSC Association that represents the European research community. The next presentation, therefore, will give an introductory overview of the purpose, objectives, and structure of the EOSC Association. It will be delivered by Karel Luyben, the former director of Delft University of Technology and current president of the EOSC Association. Welcome, Professor Luyben.
Thank you. Your kind invitation and your kind introduction, Jan-Martin. Mr. Brandenburg, dear Anna and dear Jörg, let me try and present from the EOSC Association side what is EOSC and what is the EOSC Association doing in this. And thank you very much for inviting me to this National Tripartite event. Let me start with my dream. If I plug into Google the Delft University of Technology, where I happen to work, then immediately within a second I get more than 35 million hits. And if I plug into Google Maps NFDI, I find NFDI in Karlsruhe within a second, and I have a button to find my way to get there. If I now would plug in dataset on drying of gelatin, a topic I have been working on as a researcher, I also get a result, of course, and the first article is a Nature article, and if I open the article, it happens to be an open access article, great, and it happens to have a dataset supplementary to the article. Unfortunately, the dataset is in a Word file, which I can convert to an Excel file, but the dataset doesn't contain any metadata, so I'm still lost. What I could do is, of course, look at the beautiful pictures in the article, start measuring with a lineal, and then get the data out of that. But that would be as difficult as measuring the data myself. Wouldn't it be great if we all could find a relevant dataset or more datasets for our work as easy through a web of FAIR data as we can find many things through an adequate search engine on the web nowadays, on the World Wide Web. What is this web? This web was called by Ursula von der Leyen in her Davos lecture 2 years ago, a web of scientific insight. This web of FAIR data and related services, as we used to call it, is a federation of relevant existing and future data sources. It is basically a virtual space where science producers and science consumers come together in order to exchange data and to exchange software and to exchange knowledge. In general terms, to exchange FAIR digital objects. It's open-ended in range. There is no end to it in content as well as in services. And it's meeting all the European data requirements. This, of course, has to be done in interaction with the rest of the world because researchers work, of course, in a worldwide context, especially in that discipline. What are the principles underlying making this data space? The principle that is overarching everything is that we do this for research. The overarching principle is that the researchers will benefit from it. The research process is what we're aiming at. It has to be multi-stakeholder. That means research performing organizations first, research service providing organizations secondly, and research funders, of course, are important in this game. It has to be as open as possible and as restricted as necessary. As we know, not all data can be open on the street, but all data can be fair, and the restrictions can be put on those data for those that can and those that cannot look at them, use them. It has to be based on the FAIR principles. This has been mentioned already several times. These 15 principles underlying the 4 categories, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, are of major importance to make this work and to make the interoperability especially possible. As I said, it's a federation of infrastructures, data as well as e-infrastructures, because if you have data but no e-infrastructures, you cannot work. If you have e-infrastructures and no data, it's of no use either. And a very important boundary condition, a guiding principle, is that it has to be machine actionable. So EOSC will strike the right balance between machines and people in delivering these services. If it's not machine actionable, then we are lost because there's too many data sets, the data sets are too large, and these FAIR data, as a part of it, has to be machine actionable. According to the European Commission, as we just heard, the EOSC is a cross-cutting data space for research and innovation. And this will be the basis for science, research and innovation underlying the data spaces which are being built at the moment. Connecting them, not the only connection, definitely not, but an important connection, because all of these data spaces, all of these domains will have research as an activity. It has to be, as I said, on a global level. So EOSC is already a possibility for other parties to join as an observer in the association, and other third countries can participate in giving their data to the system, but they have to adhere to the rules of participation that are applicable and to the legislation that holds here in Europe. EOSC will work together with regional initiatives. We have a lot of discussions with the United States, with other regions in the world, in order to drive this global convergence on standards in the support of implementing the Open Science Commons. Something which is done in Germany with the NFDI, we try to do in Europe in connection with the rest of the world. Extremely important. What are the grand challenges for making this a reality? Well, first of all, there are a few technical challenges. In order to create in the long run a truly broad multidisciplinary interoperability across the disciplines is a real tough challenge. Within the disciplines, something is already there. Between some of the neighboring disciplines, like, for example, in the life sciences, we see very good developments, but in order to get it really broad, it is a tough job. For that, in the short term, it means optimal authentication and authorization infrastructure. This is the first step in order to get access, of course, and a stepwise growing of interoperability. As I said, first within the disciplines, then across the neighboring disciplines, and in the long run, and then I'm talking really about the long run, across all disciplines where needed. A more difficult challenge is the social challenges. Getting the noses in the same direction. We're talking about at least 2,000 organizations in Europe that not, of course, have to do all the same, but have to be aligned on this approach. And ultimately combining the local, regional, and national initiatives in true open science commons with a global convergence on standards in support of this implementation is a tough job to do. Nevertheless, this is what we aim for. We do this by the European Open Science Cloud Partnership. This is the partnership in which we have signed an MOU between the EOSC Association on the one hand and the European Union on the other hand, signed by the European Commission. This partnership is based on this MOU, and involved in the partnership, of course, are the member states and the associated countries. These member states and associated countries form a steering board with the European Commission, and it is these three parties that are involved in making this happen, and this is what we call the tripartite collaboration. And therefore, it's nice to see that this also leads to a national tripartite event in Germany today. The EOSC Association. The EOSC Association has a purpose, as has been said already, to provide a single voice of advocacy representing the broader EOSC stakeholder community, and to promote the alignment of the European Union research policies and priorities with activities by the association. Ultimately, in the long run, to enable seamless access to data through interoperable services that address the entire research lifecycle with all the fair digital objects that come from this lifecycle. The association today has about 163 members and 78 observers, and this was our General Assembly in Brussels in May of this year. The association has a board with 9 members. One of them is Klaus Tochterman from your country, and these board members are elected for a period of 3 years. The board is relying on a brain pool of more than 400 volunteers working in 13 task forces, and these task forces are into 5 domains: the implementation of EOSC, the technical challenges of EOSC, the metadata and the data quality, research careers and curricula, and of course, the financial sustainability and the long-term data preservation, an important topic this task force is working on. The MOU, which has been signed, as was mentioned, until the end, which holds until the end of 2030, commits the European Commission to take due notice and into account the advices from the association, so from the community, in defining the topics relevant for this development. And the association gives an in-kind contribution and monitors and reports on the developments. So the cash contribution comes from the Commission, 490 million euro over a period of Horizon Europe, and the in-kind contribution comes from the members of the association, some 500 million over the period. This is defined in a SRIA, a Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda, with 3 main goals. Open science practices to become the, let's say, new normal, where the skills and the rewards are taught as a new normal. Standards and tools and services for the researchers to be able to find and reuse the data, and the federated infrastructure I've been talking about. We do this by providing to the Commission multi-annual roadmaps. The first one was for the period 21-22, and we have recently completed the 23-24 roadmap, where we see an expansion of the production. And then the next step will be that we provide together a roadmap for the period 25-27. As I said, the event here in Germany today is a last in a cycle this year, but there are already several of these tripartite events planned for next year. We had in 16 countries events. We had in 9 places events with 16 countries involved, and in total there were some 1,200 people participating in these events. I come back to my dream, and I say that if in 2040, 50% of all the relevant research data, and by relevant, I mean relevant for the researchers, And by data, I mean data, publications, and software, would be as fair as possible. And by fair as possible, I mean as fair as possible at that time with the standards that have been developed at that time. Then my dream would be come true. But remember, this has to be done worldwide. This is not a venture only for Europe or only for Germany. This, in other words, would mean that I would be able, with the software I had developed in the past, not nowadays anymore because it's not working anymore, with a few clicks to find the diffusion coefficient of water as a function of temperature and water concentration, and then with the compositions of gelatin I'm interested in. That would enable me to predict the drying behavior of that material under different conditions. And if we understand, and in different setups, if we understand that drying at that time took 15% of the world energy, this would have saved a lot of time in the development and a lot of energy in the applications. Of course, we cannot wait till 2040 until we have something. In 2040, 50% would means that we have to do a lot of things as EOSC in the meantime. So therefore, the priorities for next 2 years, starting to deliver results in 2025, is first of all in the technical area, we will create the core of this venture and we will create the onboarding procedures in order to start working with this. The interoperability and the data search are at the core of this development and are also part of the procurement taking place at this moment. And last but not least, we have to develop methodologies to find ways to judge the data quality. This is of no use if we make lousy data fair because we need data with data quality. Similar thing as with, of course, publications and research work in general. This means the involvement of member states. Germany is a member state that is heavily involved, I would say. It means funding and resourcing models in order to make this possible. The European Commission, for the time being, is the largest funder of this development, and it needs skills and recognition of the people that do these things, recognition and rewards in order to have the people that work in this direction rewarded for the things they're doing, and skills, they have been mentioned already, for as well the researchers as the service providers for those researchers, the data stewards. With that, let's co-create EOSC and let's work for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Karel. Thank you, Professor Luyben. Now, let's get some more food for thought about the role of scientific information infrastructure and ideas how to bring them to their full potential. In Germany, as an important body in this context, I have to mention the German Council for Scientific Information Infrastructures, the RFII, that in 2016 published the recommendation to found and fund a national research data infrastructure, which was, as we know today, the beginning of the NFDI. Lars Bernard is professor for geoinformatics at the Technical University of Dresden. Since 2020, he also serves as the chief Officer Digitization and Information Management in Dresden, and he is the deputy chair of the RFII. In all of these roles, he is an excellent observer of the development of both the NFDI and the EOSC. Professor Bernard, we are looking forward to your Impulse lecture.
Thank you, Jan-Martin. Thank you for putting high expectations for this presentation. Good morning to all and everyone. Good morning to the State Secretary of Mario Brandenburg. Good morning again to Karel. Thank you very much for your dream, which I fully share and which you showed us. It is my pleasure to present you quickly about the role of the German Council for Scientific Information Infrastructures within the shaping of NFDI and moderating and mediating with the EOSC. Just quickly about the RFII, it was a wise decision in 2014 when the Joint Science Conference founded the German Council on Scientific Infrastructures, the RFII, and said that this would be the place where the institutions, the scientific users, the funders, the politics discuss and decide about the future of information infrastructures for science, including all the user perspective as well as the infrastructure perspective in a broad sense, including libraries, computing centers, and so forth. It was meant to be an institution that comes up with recommendations and position papers, and it defines itself the NFDI as a think tank. So it takes and tries to take always a holistic perspective on the science system abroad in Germany, but also in Europe and in the world. It tries to have the self-organization in science triggered and stimulate these processes within science to come up with common ideas, with common standards, and to trigger for these common standards. It, of course, does not act in any operative tasks. It stays away from these operative tasks, but stays on a recommendation level, if you like. And it looks on the feasibility of the results of the ongoing developments. And in that sense, it was quite active. And Jan-Martin already mentioned in the first report, Performance through Diversity, that lays the foundation for the German NFDI, in which then was successfully followed by a priority program in policy, and that which brings us now $1 billion to support the development of the NFDI within a time trace of 10 years. It has other topics addressed, like data quality, for instance. There was a report on conference in 2019. It addressed the topic of skills, so how to develop digital competencies within the different institutions, how to develop career paths for the staff that we need to set up information infrastructures, because it's crystal clear if we don't change the way we build these competencies, we won't have the dream come true that Karel just presented. It talks about, in another paper, the FI on the use and the valorization of data in science and academia, and gives recommendations on that one. And of course, it also commented on different European legislation initiatives. And as I said, this is quite active. There's a number of position papers that you can find on the FI website, and all of these highly cited and well recognized in the scientific community, thanks to the members of the FI and the Council. One of the latest papers that was published by the FAI was a report on science policy activities towards open science in Europe. The idea here was to compare the strategies that we find within the European member states, and we took as examples to look into these states for more details for France, Netherlands, and at that time, when we started that, still being a member, Great Britain, and to compare these with the developments in Germany. The question was how these all relate and whether they relate already to each other, and how these relate to other initiatives worldwide, national initiatives and regulations, and to see whether and how far we can derive recommendations for the policy agenda within Germany, but also for scientific decision makers on the future development of research data infrastructures. Starting with the very general findings of this report, there's, I think, something that you would all agree upon. We find numerous different and still mostly unconnected initiatives developing information infrastructures or research data infrastructure or data spaces within Europe. All of them, of course, following the FAIR principles. FAIR is established fully and widely. There's no question about that one. Mostly is also considering how to get these infrastructures more usable, affordable, and reliable for research data management, and how to get to common standards. Most of them are still lacking a long-term perspective, especially if you look into long-term funding and long-term operation model. That is an issue that we found in most of these initiatives. Still, they are in the one or other way given funding that is in a way having only a limited time frame. We have a few of them being linked to commercial initiatives or industry initiatives. I think the most prominent one is Gaia-X, but still these things are mostly used. And especially if you look into the use of private data or industry data for science, then we only have rarely something like best practices or role models that one could follow. If one would go into more detail and compare the NFDI with the EOSC, then of course you see a number of commonalities between these two. Clearly, the NFDI focuses mostly on researchers in Germany, whereas the EOSC focuses mostly researchers in the EU. That goes without saying. We have a quite different approach in terms of how the developments are set up. The NFDI has the idea of combining infrastructure providers and researchers in domain-specific consortia. That being, I think, one of the main ideas and possibly new ideas of the NFDI, and hopefully leading to the success of the NFDI. Whereas the EOSC idea was more one of the federation of fair data and related services in a kind of marketplace vision. We have a lot of similarities in the governance models. We have a bit difference in the funding problems. If you look into details, we have the national program in Germany for the NFDI. We have different EC programs for funding the EOSC. We have a bit different approaches in how to get to the so-called basic services. As already mentioned by Mario Brandenburg, we have the joint initiative of all the domain-specific consortia in the NFDI to establish common basic services fitting the needs of all the consortia and having a consensus-based process towards these basic services. We have more a contract-driven and kind of market-driven approach within the EOSC. So there are slight differences in both, and one has to see how that will deliver results on the long run. In the report, you also find recommendations like these that I collected out of these recommendations. First, the recommendation to support communities and help desk for scientists abroad, not to forget the scientists and their support, to have exchange forums and working room for common standards and to exchange between the different infrastructures, and these tripartite event being a perfect example for this one. But to also have studies, scientific studies on the success and the development of these federated information infrastructures. As already said by Karel, that will be a long-term process, so we need these studies to promote the advantages and, of course, to have an idea on the long-term funding and long-term operation of this. And last not least, to have research clauses for scientific access to private data, one of the more prominent examples of current discussions. If you put that in a, let's say, 20 years perspective, then I would hope that we have all the initiatives interconnected, so that is my part of the dream, that we have integrated and federated service portfolios, easy access for all researchers to fair data, that we have ideas on long-term funding, and that we have quite well-fitting funding programs between all the different institutions, and an idea of evaluation of our infrastructures, and that we have cooperation between industry and science, and that use of private data in science is not longer the exception. And I would like to invite all of you, not having only this event for these discussions, but also have a new event in April next year in Hanover, where we can also go for a discussion on how to co-create these vision and how to go further in this vision. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Bernard. The German Research Foundation has been responsible for organizing all three NFDI calls for application. Dr. Katrin Winkler is Program Director for Scientific Library Services and Information Systems at the DFG, and in her Impulse lecture, she will now discuss the national international funding strategy of the DFG, and also will look at the topic beyond pure research data, funding strategy in Germany, the significance of horizontal and vertical integration. Katrin Winkler, everybody, good morning.
Yes, hello, good morning. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. As already mentioned, I would like to give a short impulse lecture on the funding strategy in Germany based on the position of the DFG, and I would like to take a closer look on aspects of vertical and horizontal integration. And this should not only be a pure funding strategy or address pure funding strategy issues, but also policy aspects. Like no other field, open science is characterized by great complexity and diversity. Not only does open science have a wide variety of different orientations, such as open data, open access, open source, and so on, complexity and diversity are also particularly evident in relation to the various scientific disciplines, many of which have very different research practices. Diversity and heterogeneity are also particularly evident at the institutional, national, and European or international level. It is a great challenge to take up these different peculiarities and to develop both a clear policy that takes sufficient account of the different specifics, the necessities and requirements of researchers, as well as other important aspects, and to develop correspondingly meaningful and coordinated funding instruments. In this sense, it is important to create possibilities for sensible horizontal as well as vertical integration, and especially to involve the research community in this process. Open science has long since ceased to be a theoretical discussion or debate on the part of science policy, but is increasingly gaining importance in scientific research culture, especially across disciplines. The reasons for this are the ubiquity and the current dynamics in the development of digital technologies and science, which has had a major upswing, not least due to the special situation of the last 2 years. The German science organizations are trying to pick up on this zeitgeist and corresponding developments by integrating them into its policies and by developing corresponding standards for research practices. Also, DFG has taken up these impulses and is implementing the various developments in terms of science policy and funding strategy. At the level of policy development, DFG recently adopted a position on open science. This position states that DFG understands open science as a transformation of scientific practice that aims both to make research results available as openly as possible in the long term and to improve their use by third parties. Open science can make an important contribution to quality assurance and enhancement, but it must be developed in a very different sectors of the science system. In this context, it is equally important to keep a close eye on any undesirable developments. So it is important to consciously shape the transformation of scientific practice with researchers and to continue to focus on quality rather than on public perception when assessing performance. Especially with regard to quality assurance, traceability, and replicability, research data play a particularly prominent role. That's why in recent years, DFG has clearly specified the requirements for how research data should be handled in proposals. It has been a long road until then. The starting point continues to be the guidelines on handling research data adopted by the DFG Senate. Important here are, on the one hand, the clear indications that archiving research data and making it accessible are essential contributions to quality assurance and also to the traceability of research. The third party of the guideline was particularly effective. In this part, professional societies were asked to address the issue of research data management in depth and to develop specific recommendations for their communities. Some of these recommendations have been fed back to the DFG and have been adopted by the review boards as a kind of guideline for the evaluation of proposals. Furthermore, digital practices are also clearly described in a code of good scientific practice, for instance, how research using digital technologies and tools should be considered. In addition, DFG, of course, has its own funding programs aimed at establishing and expanding research data infrastructures. First and foremost is the program Information Infrastructures for Research Data, which was published only this year with a significantly modified structure. The goals of the program are primarily to develop infrastructures and services of research data management, to establish networking forums, and to conceive and establish rules of evaluations for research data management in a specific community. And besides that, funding can also be provided for the creation of training measures. When revising the program, it was particularly important not only to focus on data, but to design complex systems with multiple interdependencies. For example, it must be possible to relate data to software, to publications, or to research information systems. This is what we call horizontal integration. On the part of DFG, we have a variety of programs that support projects that can then in turn function for horizontal integration. For example, we have programs to promote e-research technologies, as well as the programs on funding infrastructures for scientific publishing and open access publication, our main programs to support the open access transformation. In addition, this year, we have also created a program to support self-organization processes and coordinating activities in the area of information infrastructures, as well as for networking with the scientific community. Vertical integration is now about the interaction of data-specific services. Here, it is important to pick up researchers at their workplace and to ensure that the services used there are optimally coordinated with data services at regional, national, and European or international level. NFDI is a particularly fine example of the integration of services. Here, the idea of networking is particularly strongly incorporated. That means that DFG stimulated the networking of the consortia even before the application was submitted via NFDI conferences. The organizational forms, not least the NFDI sections, also show how important the interaction of researchers with the infrastructure communities. If we consider the NFDI as a national service or national offer, it will also need services, for instance, in the area of authorization and authentication that are shared by all within the NFDI. Identifying such services is also a joint task in which appropriate processes for coordination must ensure that the interests of all parties are appreciated. Both nationally and internationally, it is evident that DFG is well advised to coordinate with its partners. For example, open science has long been an important topic for all German research and funding organizations, and we work together with these organizations within the Alliance of Initiative Digital Information. For example, in addition, DFG participates in a wide variety of European and international organizations, such as working groups of Science Europe on open science or research data. In particular, work presented by the latter Science Europe Working Group, namely the practical guide to the alignment of research data management, was very successful for our funding program development. When we speak of vertical integration in this coordinate system, EOSC must of course be mentioned as an essential building block for the development of a European space for science, research, and innovation. DFG and many other German organizations work very intensely within the framework of the governance of the EOSC Association, and in particular within its task forces. By doing so, we contribute to the development and design of the EOSC. How national and European developments are coordinated here is shown, among other things, by the positioning of national structures such as the NFDI or the various funding programs mentioned above as essential contributions to the EOSC. At the European level, European data space is also being established in a whole series of key areas, as we heard, such as health, energy, or the environment. This is also interesting because the basic ideas of these data spaces are very similar to ideas you know from the NFDI. Here too, the idea is to make data accessible, to be able to process and to connect them, not only within a sector, but also beyond individual sectors. This is also a good example of the need for vertical integration. And that is why the interoperability of data and governance that allows legally compliant access and work with data play an essential role as well. There's certainly a large number of other present or future examples in the area of research data and also in the broader area of science that could be mentioned considering vertical and horizontal integration. One of these examples is, for instance, the Planned Data Institute in Germany, which is currently being designed in terms of its tasks and orientation, and which could probably provide for the integration of other sectors, such as business, industry, public authorities, and agencies. And with that outlook, I would like to end my presentation here, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Katrin Winkler. Thank you everybody for your impulses and for your insights. So now it's time to learn more about the NFDI sections and what they can contribute to the EOSC, but also what they, on the other hand, expect from the EOSC. In the international context, contributions and expectations from Germany to EOSC. First, Professor Sure Vetter will give us a short introduction before representatives of the NFDI sections will share their perspectives with us. Professor Sure Vetter.
Thank you, Jan-Martin Wiarda. So in NFDI, we bring together researchers from all research communities, from the natural sciences to social sciences, to engineering, to life sciences. And they all work on big challenges in digitization in their research community. However, we can only be successful in the long run if we understand what are the cross-cutting topics that bring together all researchers from these disciplines. And we have to find means to provide these, to back up these cross-disciplinary topics. And we have to work on them. And for that, we have created so-called sections in NFDI. At the moment, we have 4 sections, and all of the 4 sections are present today, so they will be introduced a bit later. The core idea in each section is as I said, to bring together people from different communities to understand what the next big challenge is in that particular cross-cutting topic, to work towards it, to have a shared agreement, and sometimes to find new resources to fund these endeavors. I'm really looking forward for the upcoming impulse statements that show first results from these discussions in our community.
Thank you very much, Professor Suhre-Vetter. So let's start with the common infrastructures and the section Infra. Michael Diepenbroek is the speaker and Sonja Schimmler is the deputy speaker of the section. Please go ahead.
Okay. Trying to share my screen. Okay. Yeah, thank you. So the section common infrastructure has several goals. One is more general, overarching to identify, design, and build collaborative infrastructure components and their interoperability. And we also have a more specific one that's a multi-cloud-based infrastructure called Research Data Commons. This commons concept is also in line with Gaia-X. NFDI and Gaia-X have a common project called Fair Data Spaces. So it also allows hybrid clouds and also the inclusion of cloud instances by big scalers as Google or Amazon. In this respect, the framework associations supplied by GEANT might be quite helpful. Nevertheless, in Germany, we have large compute and storage capacities available. However, and that's a big challenge, most of these computer data centers are on-premise, so migration to multi-cloud or cloud-based infrastructure components is maybe really a challenge. So by now we have set up around 10 working groups comprising more than 120 members, representing 80 institutions in the NFDI. All the topics in the working groups are well aligned around the RDC. However, they can also be seen independent, but in combination with the RDC concept, topics like identity and access management or data integration would enable a tremendous increase in efficiency in the reusage or usage of existing data and services in the NFDI. So, and finally, we've a new project base for NFDI, and that's a new instrument and will be very helpful in the further efficient organization of the basic services within the NFDI. Next, what are we doing for the international context here? Certainly the focus is on the EOSC. How do we contribute? Our goals match well with the concept of the EOSC, the era and also the Global Open Research Commons interest group of the RDA. I would say the NFDI is more user-driven. The EOSC is more policy and concept-driven. Yeah, and in addition, the section Infra, that's well known, is well represented with all topics in the EOSC advisory groups and projects. More recently, we have started collaboration with newly funded projects Fair Impact and Fair Core for EOSC. Also, some of the members of the sections are direct participants in these projects. So now for the last question, how do we benefit? Certainly, we benefit from the further elaboration of the overall architecture and interoperability and security aspects, frameworks, and this also includes the important aspects of governance. Second, medium to long term, we expect also the possibility of crosswalks with existing European infrastructures, and last not least, we expect that the alignment with EOSC core services will give added value. For example, the identity and access management, here we can already profit from the past H2020 project IARC. Overall, in summary, I would say the EOSC and NFDI here with respect to this section here complement each other in an ideal way. That's for my part. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael Diepenbroek. And right away we move on to the ethical, legal and social aspects and to the section ELSA. Ulrich Sachs is its deputy speaker. Welcome, Ulrich Sachs.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, now to something slightly different, to the ethical, legal and social aspects, which are very important for most of the consortia we see here in the NFDI. So what are we doing? So at first, we had to identify and to prioritize ethical, legal and social aspects. There were quite a lot, and already during writing the proposals, we had quite some overlap and some discussions, which aspects we should already put into the proposals, where we should also already show synergies, because it was very clear that they will show up. Secondly, we are connecting people. I think that's very important, independent of the communities, etc. We have to connect people, the consortia and the specialists in order to share experiences and solutions which are out there. And we had some nice effects already looking at solutions in social sciences, for example, comparing them with solutions in medical sciences, and making best combination of those complementary solutions. Of course, we involve actively in projects which we already saw on the previous slides, FAIR-DS, Base for NFDI, etc. And this is not only limited to those NFDI projects. We are active in many more projects which have interesting overlap. We did not put in working groups because I think the ethical and legal social aspects are somehow different than the infrastructure aspects. We initiate task forces for some urgent issues. Advantage would be that there's a clear mandate, there's a limited duration of those task forces and transparent results in order to use the synergies between consortia. I'll show you an example in a minute. We actively pick up new communities and new consortia. As we know, in the next funding periods, there's some very interesting communities coming up. We actively want to involve them into the task forces, into the section. And we are catalyzing thematically focused working groups with the specialist communities. Example from the biomedical communities, there's the medical informatics initiative, where we see quite some interesting research data centers, some interesting contracting mechanisms. NFDI for Health, we're doing similar things, reusing some instruments and methods. I think that's really important, not to reinvent the wheel, but take best practice and combine it. So in a nutshell, we share best practice, contacts, tools, and methods with the NFDI and beyond. So one example, we met virtually in those times. So this was more a hybrid meeting, as you see. Technically, it worked perfectly in the hybrid settings, but the benefit was that we actually met people working on the same issues in different disciplines. We actually had to clarify and discuss some terms where at first we thought it would be clear. Of course, GDPR is the overall motive for the legal aspects. Data trust is very important in order to get data holding organizations to share the data and make the data accessible. We looked at the perspective of the funding agencies and discussed. You see, you can download the slides in German, unfortunately, but this is, as I told, the transparent results that we learn from each other. And yeah, I think that's the first very important cross-section on anonymization of data and data trusteeship. So that's a concrete result. We're looking forward to bringing this into the EOSC. We see some quite interesting working groups, interesting results in there we're aware of, and we want to actively contribute to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ulrich Sachs. And now we go on to metadata, terminologies, provenance in this section. Metadata, and I'm looking forward to Dr. Brigitte Matiak. She's the Deputy Section Speaker.
All right, I just have to share my screen. I hope that worked. Okay, thank you. So let me introduce to you the our section for metadata, terminology, and provenance. My name is Brigitte Matiak. I'm from GESIS, and I'm deputy speaker with and Oliver Köppler is the active speaker, but unfortunately can't be here today. Yes. Okay, so let's first start with what the scope of the section is. We are currently looking at 26 NFDI consortia within multiple scientific disciplines that have contributed to the section. We have over 100 members, 50 institutions, and similar to the infra section, we have formed some working groups. One of them is search and harvesting. One of them is cookbook best practices and guidelines. One of them is terminology services, ontology harmonization, ontology mapping, and knowledge graphs. And what we have done so far is really followed a bottom-up approach. Starting with community requirements, as we saw them, we had one initial workshop where we had this big Miro board where everybody could contribute. What are the is everybody interested in? What are the requirements that come from the individual communities and the individual consortia? And then we were looking into harmonization, standardization, common applications. And from the working groups right now, we are quite busy starting to design and map out possible services in base for NFDI that will then be available over all consortia and eventually also to the European Open Science Cloud. What is important to us, especially in the international context? So we are, as a section, kind of in between. We have the consortia, which are very important to us because they are the connection to the individual communities. But there's also the EOSC, and then there's, of course, the international context. And our goal is really to build upon existing success stories. So what we have here is the XKCD story, comic, one of my favorites, about how we can make how standards proliferate. And one of the goals that have really come up, I think, within all the working groups is that this is a trap that we don't want to fall in. So what we're really trying to do is to see, okay, what works, who has done what, how can we increase adoption, how can we make people aware that certain things exist, and so on and so forth. And from my personal experience within the working groups, this is already a goal that has been met in many instances. So even just talking about what are you doing in this situation, what are your problems, how have you solved them, we've already come together and seen many synergies. So I'm already very happy with that, but of course there's more to come. Going on with the strategy, there are of course a lot of matching activities within the European Open Science Cloud, especially among the metadata and data quality aspects. There's a task force on metrics and data quality, which is also something that we're looking into, and also there's a task force on semantic interoperability, and we also have some personal overlap with these two. Okay, so what is our contribution? What we will contribute are the use cases from the various scientific communities as they occur within the consortia, and also the services that will eventually arise. One of them will, for example, be a terminology service. And the idea is there to make that as open as possible, so that additional terminologies, for example, would also be possible to add on there. Our expectation is that we coordinate very strongly with regards to standardization activities, so we avoid having more standards than absolutely strictly necessary, instead push the adoption of standards, and also to coordinate and exchange on semantic durability and other topics. Yeah, and that's basically from my side. I think next one is EduTrain.
Thank you, Brigitte Matiak. And you're right, the next one, and last not least one, is EduTrain. We will learn more about training education and the section EduTrain. Peter F. Peltz, you're the section speaker. The digital floor is yours.
Thanks very much. I'm heading the section jointly with Sonja Harris-Pavlis, and it's a pleasure to report here and present our progress in the section EduTrain. We heard earlier on that training and education, it should be right at the start. So technology is one side, but really the change in treatment of data and making data available starts in the heads of the researchers. So data literacy from the very beginning is really a paradigm which we are following. And of course, digitalization and using of data is always driven by need. It's fair data and data science on the other side. So it's the supply of the data and the usage of the data. And then you see here in these rings the value of the data, the solutions, the costs of data, the ethics, the regulations and parts, and data governance and public. So this gives a little bit the scope which is meant by data literacy, but this is a progress of discussion. So this is a progress of doing science, defining terms. I will talk about now on EduTrain, and EduTrain is quite strongly related to the data competence centers, which are about to be established within Germany. And this coordination will be done jointly with the BMBF and EduTrain, so the data competence centers, which will be to establish in Germany. They will be also very closely connected to NFDI and the section EduTrain. What are the objectives of EduTrain? First, it's a bottom-up approach as NFDI as such within Germany. It is then the discussion and the solutions for data literacy. It is quality assured educational pathways. And the last task, but not last, is a common understanding within NFDI, but also in the discussion with EOSC and the other groups about that term data literacy, which I just spotted on a little bit. We have differing working packages and working groups. You see here, a little bit interesting is the establishment of an error culture. So the working package on the bottom, which really brought up in our section in a bottom-up approach. There was a need from the community to discuss about error culture and how to treat that. And this is really an educational topic which will be addressed and is addressed within the section EduTrain. I will spot a little bit on the working package 4, which is the knowledge base and making that available. And you see the overlaps with the other sections as well, which is a good one. And we discuss in regular meetings between the different sections. So it's a little bit about that knowledge base. And once again, you see here this picture, and this is now a public funded project where we establish within NFDI a semantic web technology-based knowledge graph where all the educational resources are collected. And this is really what we can contribute to EOSC, to EOSC. We can contribute this, and we would be happy if we can share this on an European level. And again, it is user-driven, so we have the stakeholder approaches of a student, of a postdoc, of a professor, of a PhD student. They ask questions to Dahlia and will get answers from Dahlia. So this is the vision. And we have here the different career levels. We have the scientific disciplines as the other coordinate, and we have there on the vertical axis the data stewardships from the beginner, from the advanced to the expert, and then at the very end, maybe we are discussing this, an NFDI or even an EOSC certificate data stewardships. What are the expectations and the contributions? First of all, well, those projects we are doing within the section EduTrain, and what comes out of this project, this will be brought to EOSC as right away. So we are very open to this, and we are loving the exchange, and actually we are taking part of this exchange already. So it's a push and pull between NFDI and EOSC. And at the end, from my perspective, it's a single network. So thanks very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Peter F. Peltz. So now we learn more about the 4 sections on the NFDI. We talked a lot about EOSC, and we talked about possible linkages, further ground for cooperation. And that will lead us now in the panel discussion that will follow after a short break of about 10 minutes. We'll see each other again at 11:30. And then we will ask the question, NFDI and EOSC, why do we need both? So stay tuned, 11:30, we will be back for the panel discussion. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to our panel discussion on probably the most important question, NFDI and EOSC. Why do we need both? What's the added benefit of having both? So I'd like to introduce my fellow panelists. Next to me, Raphael Ritz. He is head of data division at the Max Planck Computing and Data Facility. He's member of the NFDI Consortium Fermat, chairman Research Data Alliance Deutschland, and member of the EOSC Task Force. So a lot of things to do, a lot of things to work on. Great to have you with us, Raphael Ritz. Welcome to Ute Gunsenheimer. She is the Secretary General of the EOSC Association since November 21. Before joining EOSC, she was head of external relations and EU projects at the European Spallation Source in Lund, Sweden, where she and her team managed the stakeholder relations as well as the international grant participation. Great to have you with us. It's also great to have Roland Bertelmann with us. He's head of Helmholtz Open Science Office of the Helmholtz Open Science Office since 2021. Before that, he was head of Library Information Services at the GFZ, German Research Center for Geoscience. And in your capacity, you were co-founder in this capacity at the GFZ. You were co-founder and co-applicant for the NFDI for Earth Consortium. And it's great to have Andrea Herdingen with us. She works in the BMBF and is the BMBF representatives on the EOSC steering board. And well, I don't have to introduce you once again, Jörg Surefetter. It's great that you are here as representatives of the NDFI and NFDI. And so I would like to start with a short round of introductory statements, 2 minutes each, not longer. So be brief and be clear. Why do we need both NFDI and EOSC, Raphael Ritz?
Yeah, as you can see from what was mentioned, where I am all involved, I can witness that there are many activities going on at various levels in different settings with different people from ranging all over the world. If you look at RDA, with a European focus for the EOSC, with a national focus on NFDI, and all these actually make sense. National initiatives, not the least for national funding, so to say. A lot of research is actually funded on the national level still. Yet science is a global endeavor calling for international collaboration. And somewhat in between, as I'm now framing it, is Europe as an important area in the world and an important force for us here in Europe through the European Union that is primed to actually coordinate cross-national activities, first and foremost within Europe, but then also connecting it to the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. So we move on to
So first of all, let me thank you and give you big compliments for this very well organized and very, let's say, inspiring first session that we had in the morning. And I mean, what I have seen, and I think this is my core message, I only see opportunities here. I see opportunities when it comes to the policy making, because the topic of open science and fair data is high on the policy agenda, on an international as well as a national agenda with the ERA and action number 1 that was pointed out in the introduction. I see it on the funding level. We have the commitment from the European Commission in Horizon Europe. We have it with the members of the EOSC Association and on a national level. So that's fantastic, let's say, also in terms of being resourced. And finally, it's great to see this community work. And I have to admit, I haven't been aware of what's happening here on a national level. We have in the EOSC Association 444 volunteers in our task forces. You have your sections, you have your consortia. And I think the opportunity here is that we now bring that all together in a meaningful way, that we really materialize the complementarity of the activities.
So only opportunities.
So I follow up with the opportunities. I think, as Raphael said, science is a global endeavor, and that's the point why we need also this work on the European level, we need this work on the national level, and of course we need this work also on organizational levels down in the whole thing. And I think research data itself is really one of the main pillars for open science. And so it's good to work there and building communities and interconnecting all these communities.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Andrea Herding.
Yes, thank you. I can only repeat the feeling that I got this during this whole meeting, that we are all together in this endeavor to create an ecosystem to exchange research data, and as you said, it's an endeavor that goes beyond national borders, and as science does. So NFDI is an essential part of EOSC. It was thought and constructed that way. EOSC is the broader concept, and they both can profit from a greater integration and also inspiration for each other. I think this is part of the meeting today as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Jörg Suche-Vetter, why do we need both?
Thank you very much for the question. And I would like to add a different perspective maybe. And my perspective is we need both because we need to create trust on different levels. So in NFDI, we create trust in research organizations and research communities, and we share this across all disciplines, and we need this linkage to the international community. So this is tightly related with what you say. We are acting globally. Research is not national, research is international. And we need to make sure that the trust on the European level is there as well, and then we need to connect both. And that is why we need both, and we need organizations like us, like the mandated organization, to intertwine these things.
Thank you so much for this first round of those very diplomatic, very positive statements. But now we should dig a little deeper, and we should find out where maybe there are some challenges there, and why it's very nice and very friendly of all of us to be very happy about all of this. But let's look a little bit further. Before I do that, I'd like to invite everybody also in the audience to share questions, to share comments, and I will introduce them later during our talk. Again, the Mentimeter link, you received it, and many people already are using it. You received it during your registration for this conference, and you can also see it next to the YouTube streaming window. So you can just ask your questions, add your comments later on. All right, so let's make it a little bit more concrete now, Raphael. In the end, it's only a success, and it's only understandable to justify that there's the NFDI, there's the EOSC, there's the collaboration, if it makes the work for researchers easier, if it makes research more accessible to everybody, if it just has to be a concrete benefit for research and for society. And let's make it concrete. Can you give me an example why the work of Max Planck researchers, of researchers in Germany, elsewhere, is better because of EOSC and NFDI?
Well, first of all, many of these activities are actually quite recent or starting, so it's actually a tough
It's more a promise.
It's more a promise, but
why
indeed.
Is everybody then so excited?
But, because people understand, I hope, or I get the impression, that there is a lot to be gained. I mean, science being as I already said, an international but also collaborative endeavor. Collaborating across borders, people are kind of used to. Collaborating across disciplines is already much harder, but addressing the global challenges gaining more and more importance. If we look at the climate change, the health systems, scientists are expected to work across disciplinary boundaries, across regional boundaries, and this so far is oftentimes not easy for lack of interoperability in a technical sense, let's say, lack of appropriate funding opportunities, or cultural differences, and connecting the dots, and most importantly that's people, but also the means that we use in order to do science, has a strong promise in order to improve the situation here. And we've seen that, for instance, in recent years during the pandemic crisis, how a worldwide collaboration and a worldwide sharing of data as they were received in addressing the pandemic challenge actually led to an unprecedented speed in advancing and coming up with measures against this. And
that was even without EOSC running at full speed. So that could also mean that we don't need it if it already was at full speed without.
Well, it illustrates the potential at the very least, I would say, and it was triggered by the urgency of the situation. I don't think anything like that would have happened without. But if we now expect this to also happen in other fields and disciplines where those roadblocks are still there, the impetus that EOSC and NFDI promise should be able to take us further here.
Roland Bertelmann, I can see why people were pushing for NFDI, and I can see why you were also engaged in establishing NFDI and in the application. Was anybody pushing for EOSC?
Yes, I think indeed.
Were you pushing for EOSC?
Yes, for example, in Helmholtz, a lot of centers are in EOSC projects, are engaging in EOSC. A lot of colleagues are engaging in the task forces, indeed. But I would like to add a further point. I think with NFDI and EOSC we have new layers, recent layers. But we are working on this subject since years, I suppose, not only in Helmholtz, also in other scientific contexts. And I would like to bring in here the point that, of course, we have since years international collaboration, scientific projects are generating data and talking about data, and we have the ESRI approach with the ERICS, things like this. And just bring an organizational level to this within Helmholtz. Of course, we have also, like in other organizations, endeavors where we try to bring together people, infrastructures on the relevant subjects. And I think the great point is to bring all this together. And also on a national level, I think NFDI is a perfect thing to bring things together, but we should not forget that since years we have working groups on research data and all the subjects we are dealing with. So we have really a rich history here in Germany on the subject. And so NFDI is a new layer up there, and EOSC is also the next layer up there. And I think the really interesting point is to bring all this together from an institutional level to an organizational level to the national level with NFDI and other approaches we have on a national level and EOSC.
Jörg Suhrefetter, to what degree EOSC and NFDI will not only be like partners but also be competitors in a way? In a way, the EOSC could be a competition for the NFDI.
Good question. First of all, I like the picture of the two new kids on the block. Why should we competitors? Well, I think it's co-opetition. I think this is the word that is also relevant in this area, because we will work on shared topics and we will have different solutions, sometimes on a national, sometimes on an international level. And we do not yet fully understand where we will develop both. But it is absolutely clear that for a running national and for a running European infrastructure, we need infrastructure that connects between the different levels. And that is crossing the borderlines of countries, which is not a trivial task. If you have a shared infrastructure which is distributed, and in EOSC we are talking about a distributed infrastructure. So we have to cross borders for services that we want to deploy for researchers in all different countries. This is not an easy task. And so I think, coming back to your question, we will need more than one solution to find out what is the best solution. Mm-hmm. And I do believe in markets. So maybe it's good sometimes to have a certain market and competition, if you want to say that. But we don't have the money to have that everywhere, because research is different from the from industry markets. So we have to have a wise approach to benefit from such a competition.
One follow-up question, there is also the expectation towards EOSC that they will do some more for standardizing and for harmonizing. What if this would lead to some kind of dictate, some kind of pushing NFDA into a direction that you maybe haven't foreseen, that could also be kind of uncomfortable for NFDI in a way?
Well, you know, the good thing about standards is there are so many to choose from recently. So I don't see this coming. We have the opposite problem. We have so many standards that at the moment we are struggling to have a good strategy when to apply which standard and how to interpret these standards in the best way so that interoperability, the eye of the fair, really comes into reality. And so I don't fear what you just sketched. What I think is that we have to spend more effort on cleverly deciding what is our strategy to apply standards and then to identify when we need a new standard. Because coming up with new standards is often just a way of, I ignore the rest and mine is the best. Sometimes this happens in technical communities and there are good reasons for that. So I don't want to really blame it. Sometimes you need a competition again also. But at the end of the day, if we want Karel's dream to come true in 2050, we at some point of time need to decide what kind of standards do we want. And this is in contrast to industry, which sometimes just dictates a standard, and then there you have this, and then you dominate the market. In research, we don't want market domination. We want an open science community which is able to collaborate together. And therefore we need open standards and we need communities to agree on these standards.
But it has to be as good that researchers use that and don't retreat to commercial alternatives in the end.
Absolutely.
So it has to be competitive. Andrea Herdingen, what's the role of the BMBF in bringing EOSC and NFDI closer together? Are you just an observer and let the researchers and the research community do their thing? Or can you help them even further, push them a little bit more?
Well, we very much believe in the bottom-up nature of the NFDI process. That's the way we designed it in Germany. So there's a lot of influence in terms of suggestions that come from science, and this is a good thing. And we, as part of the steering board, of course, we bring our German perspective and what we can offer into the European dialogue. And so this conference today is a part of the exchange, and it needs to be deeper, but that's the take the view I take on this.
Thank you so much. Ute Gunzenheimer, I think you can comment on many things that have already been said, so go ahead.
Yeah, so I think NFDI and it would not only be in a competition, of course, with EOSC, because I mean EOSC is a joint endeavor of 25 countries who have signed up for ERA Action 1 and 3 others. So I think indeed we shouldn't look at it as a competition. However, I think what I would like to, let's say, point out is the topic of ownership. I think we all have to own our roles that we do have within this ecosystem. And I think to, let's say, be aware of those roles and to work towards that for the bottom up, it also means that the communities, that the consortia, in the European case, the Horizon Europe projects, that they have to deliver what they have promised, that we have to help them as association to facilitate the collaboration. We don't have a mandate, we don't have the authority to tell people what to do. We only have the, let's say, the authority of the community working together. And that's something that we are ready to do, and we are looking for everyone who wants to join us in that.
You say we have to own our roads, and Raphael Ritz, if I look at all those roads that you have, you obviously are owning them, you know, all those different functions. There's one comment in Mentimeter that for scientists it's confusing to understand how all the different initiatives, what they do, what they are and what is already usable where, what solutions are planned to create more clarity here. So obviously there's a lot of confusion out there, what initiative is for what are they doing, where are the linkages, how Can you understand that? I mean, you are having all those roles. Obviously, you are very excited about all of them. But do you sometimes get confused yourself with those roles?
Absolutely. And so there's nothing wrong with being confused in this context. I think we all share this one way or another. Even someone like me who's been involved in this for at least 10 years now. And one reason being that there is simply so much going on. But other reasons potentially being that there are also a lot of different interests and therefore stakeholders active in this endeavor. I mean, even at the European level, if you look at the Commission, some see the European Open Science Cloud with a focus on open science in advancing science towards, as the name says, open science with everything that that implies. Other people see it as an infrastructure development means, the cloud in the European Open Science Cloud. And it's different whether you want to establish a pan-European infrastructure or whether you want to advance science. But both things are happening in parallel, driven by different people, funded through different programs. And you also see that reflected at the national level in different countries in different ways. So no surprise really because, that people can get confused. And for the fellow scientists, I would like to say, ideally, you wouldn't even need to care. Because at the end of the day, your home institution, your university or research performing organization should provide you with the means and direction necessary in order to take full benefit of the existing and forthcoming resources and services.
How does that go together with the idea of a bottom-up approach? I mean, then it's not a matter of the institutions, but everybody should be involved to some degree and not wait for the institutions to provide them with something.
That when it comes to the identification design, what is it that we really need? And that is also a play back and forth between expectations and real life, so to say. That's why the considerations about research assessment that also come up in this context are so important, because let's not forget that a lot of the things we are aiming at here require changes in the working habits of our colleagues, because data as per se are usually meaningless and useless if not appropriately annotated. And then we are getting into the metadata domain. And by far not the most important metadata typically can't be generated automatically or just pop out of the systems that have been used, but need to be carefully and well thought, taken down by experts. And that takes time and effort. And if that is not rewarded, people simply don't do it. So what this is saying is we are really, or people behind the this entire movement, if I may call it that way, are really aiming at a cultural change, but also for the benefit of science, if you consider the problems that some fields are in. But,
so now we are at the culture, but I would like to go back to the governance of the whole thing and ask Ute Gunzenheimer, could the governance of EOSC and also the linkages to NFDI, but let's stay with EOSC, could it be a little bit more simple, easier to make it easier to understand and to it obviously, I even talk to people who are really much into data research and working with data who didn't really understand the governance of EOSC.
It is, let's say, not it is a complex beast, but we have started to, let's say, make it less complex by starting talking about the future. But nevertheless, I mean, just EOSC, let's say the precursor of the current governance was discussed from the years, what was it, 2018 to 2020 or something like that. So in 2 years, they came up at least with the establishment of the EOSC Association with the commitment of the member states and the European Commission to fund it under Horizon Europe in the framework of a co-program partnership. And I wouldn't underestimate, let's say, the opportunities and the power, so to speak, the community has in this co-program partnership, because we are the ones shaping the input to the work programs. And there we can now basically prove that with the new work program in Horizon Europe, the 23-24, on the European level, all the boxes have been ticked, meaning that the funders have taken the advice of the community into account. However, I mean, we are then out of the picture when it comes to the implementation after the projects have been awarded. This is on a voluntary basis that the projects have to coordinate with the association and the partnership. But that's something where we work on. I mean, we are a young organization. We are only operational for a year. So we need to, let's say, get better also and, let's say, focus on how to enable a better collaboration, because we have been also busy, not working within the partnership on, let's say, meeting all the requirements that we have in this governance system. But I mean, last point, I think it's important that we have this tripartite collaboration, so that it's not only the Commission and the community through the EOSC Association, but that the member states and the associated country have a integrated and systemized role in this governance. And I think that's very, very important, and that we are observers to each other's meetings.
Thank you so much. The two highest, most cited or highest ranking questions and comments also address the complexity issues. The highest ranked is, where do you see parallel infrastructures emerging and how can this be resolved integrated? So obviously there is the concern out there that there are parallel infrastructure being constructed. Actually, there was the comment, open science is per definition not competitive online from the audience, but at the same time, obviously, the people are concerned that there are parallel infrastructures emerging. So what can we do against that, Andrea Herrigen and Professor York?
I think we have to look a little at what infrastructure actually means. If it means networks, they cannot be big enough, and the exchange on several levels is important. If we look at the technical level, I'm not an expert here, and but there it's more essential to go to a common infrastructure. That would be my first view on this.
All right, Jörg Suhre-Vetter, the danger or the problem of parallel infrastructures emerging. What can we do about that, and how can we integrate them?
First, thanks for the new nickname, Professor York. This will stay forever. Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah. Thank you. I think it's a relevant question, but in my perspective, what we aim to be is a distributed, federated infrastructure. Yeah. So if there are two nodes, I'm happy about it. Probably we need more than two nodes. But the question then comes back to, how do we standardize how to deploy services? And this is one of the key questions we have to address in Helmholtz, in Max Planck, in other research organizations, so that at the end of the day we are able to bring together services that have the same aim, and to have a better service quality, to have a larger reach, to scale better, and all these nice features of distributed systems. And we can only achieve it if we have more than one solution. So I would turn it around and say, please make it scalable, and therefore please standardize how these things can be connected.
So let's ask Helmholtz and Max Planck. Roland Bettemann, go ahead.
Yes, we need different approaches, I would say this, but in the end we should talk about sustainability, and it's the money behind. And we didn't tackle this question. And if we build infrastructures, these infrastructures should be long-standing. We expect this. Karel talked about 2040. It's a damn long time. Until then, to have then 50% of data really fair. And we all know if you talk about money, it's difficult, and it's much more difficult in the next years, I suppose. So you may
dedicate a lot of resources to it as a research institution, and then suddenly maybe there is not the money for supporting the infrastructures
on a long run. I think that's a really important thing we should think much more about in future. And if we have a market with different approaches. I like this, yes, but we all tend to reinvent things. And we talked about the complexity of the whole system. And we talked also about that NFDI is still in a starting point. EOSC is still in a starting role. I still think we need much more overview. Who is on which subject? Who has already developed what? And then we have to find governance possibilities to decide which is the approach we go forward. And just to go back for the question was with Helmholtz, we have an infrastructure in Helmholtz. We have an Helmholtz metadata collaboration. We have a Helmholtz federated infrastructure structure. And at the moment, it's scalable for Helmholtz. And I think we have solutions, like in other organizations, there are also solutions. But how is it scalable? And who pays for it in the end?
Thank you also for raising the point of the overview. This is something that I hear very often. We don't even know what's out there. We don't even know who's working on what. And so in order to make those initiatives coming together and avoid parallel structures, we first need to know what they are. And Ute Gunsheimer, just a short question in between. Wouldn't that be the first and most priority for EOSC, also for NFDI, but for EOSC, to get this overview done?
I think this is exactly what we are trying to do, and I mean, kickstart with those national tripartite events, because I mean, this is the opportunity to understand what's happening in each of the countries. And we've been touring around Europe, I think, since September this year, and have had, as Karel said, those 10 events with whatever 16 countries we've targeted, and the situations nationally are so different. Yeah. And I think this is the first thing in this first round, just to understand what is even going on, what's the community, what's the level of awareness and engagement. And I think we should really next year, and that should be something we do in our tripartite European collaboration, establish a working plan where we say this is what we need to do on a European level to understand and map what's going on, and this is what's happening nationally, and also understand national priorities and needs, because they will be completely different here in Germany than, for example, in Ireland, where we had our first event after the summer, where they have met for the first time. So, I mean, there's a lot to do, and we're happy for everyone who joins us on this journey.
Yeah, to your previous question, I would like to start with a quote from my colleague Hans Bungartz, computer scientist at the Technical University in Munich, who was once putting up the question, where is the infrastructure for the infrastructure? Yeah. Specifically targeted in that context on the NFDI, but the same considerations apply to the EOSC. And it is indeed an unanswered question, because neither EOSC nor NFDI are, if you take a closer look, on the provisioning of services, but they are rather focusing on identifying, designing, developing, hardening, but never about operations. And in German we sometimes say, kein Blech und kein Beton. So no constructions, no hardware. And the underlying assumption often seems to be that at that level the infrastructure is there within the research performing organizations, the universities, Helmholtz, Max Planck. And to a certain extent that's actually correct. But on the other hand, it is a tough task to actually integrate those existing resources for a number of reasons. Some have been mentioned, but I would like to add an additional one. On paper, we, the Max Planck Computing and Data Facility, we are not even allowed to provide our services to third parties unless there is a legitimate interest from within the Max Planck Society itself. Because the Max Planck Society, since decades, has dedicated substantial resources into building up the IT infrastructure it maintains today, the high-performance computing system, but also the data infrastructure that we have. And we cannot simply just open that up to the rest of the world, or at least we rather be careful how to do that in a proper, sane and responsible way. And then we are not only talking money, but also governance and all these things that a lot of the activities here are actually about, and that's for good reasons.
May I add something on top? Yes, thank you. I think in Germany we have a clever strategy because in NFDI we focus on communities and the community needs, and we bring them together and we come up with applications, data-driven applications, and we want to establish research data management across all communities. And I fully agree with that point of view that we also need the infrastructure for the infrastructure on that point of view, that we need computing and storage especially. And in Germany we have also a strategy how to come up with a shared computage and storage facilities. And of course, one of the next steps is then to bring these things together. We are starting activities in there. And that is for me the clear path to the future. So it's not solved, the challenge is there, but we also have a plan in Germany, and this is what I actually like. Now for Europe, it is not exactly the same picture, but I see similar parallels. And that is we also have like EUDAT, and we have other initiatives on the European level where you have infrastructure for infrastructure from a certain point of view. And now with EOSC, we have the chance to bring the communities together. So we have parallels, and I think we need to better understand how these can be intertwined. This is a picture I very much like. So we have lots of things that intertwine now, and at the end we hopefully have a nice carpet on the floor, which comes from many different colors and many different strings. And we are now at the beginning of starting the community level, the application level. We are harmonizing more the infrastructure level, and then one big next step, maybe in 2-3 years, is really to bring together these two levels.
We're still touching the issues that are most important, obviously, to our audience. One comment, the hefty federal state initiative strongly supports that we need to intertwine initiatives on the various scales, as trust is often generated locally or with a subject-specific voice. One comment. Then the question, how can we bring all together and harmonize and synergize the various ongoing activities we just were talking about? But obviously, I have to find the question again. Oh yeah, there it is. Obviously, there is still some reservation about that those things are really harmonized, because the very high-ranked question is, should German-hosted domain-specific global data infrastructures prioritize engagement in NFDI or EOSC? So obviously for them, it's in either or. Andrea Herdingen, what should they prioritize?
The answer is clear.
So there we see there is, in some degree, there obviously is competition when it comes to resources and to know what we are doing first. So it's not a very diplomatic question, but it's out there. What should we prioritize?
But isn't it by doing one, giving it to NFDI, you do also the other? There is not really a competition on that level, but yes, first we are within the national system, NFDI, but this needs to be linked and be open to EOSC.
So the answer would be by prioritizing NFDI, you also prioritize EOSC?
Yes, in a way, yes.
Mm-hmm. I would say pick best of both worlds, and it's not mutually exclusive. You can actually be engaged also in terms of scientific projects in both worlds. And to illustrate that with a concrete example that I'm personally involved in, the novel materials discovery activity that also underlie the Fairmont NFDI consortium, on a different strand, this is actually also a European Center of Excellence. Of course, you need to be careful to organize yourself in such a way that you can reasonably prove that this is not double funding. But if you get these things right, it's perfectly fine to participate in both worlds and to profit from both developments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Germany is the biggest country in Europe, and I mean, you shouldn't miss the opportunity to shape activities that are going on a pan-European level. And I mean, for me, that's a no-brainer, so to speak. And NFDI is the mandated organization of Germany in the EOSC Association. And whatever you do in NFDI, that is, let's say, supporting what we call the 3-year objective, the strategic research and innovation agenda that guides our partnership with the Commission, is being accounted to that. And that's an important contribution, and we should be, or you should be proud of it. We all, as EOSC Association, should be proud of that. And so I think this is really obvious.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. You talked about Germany being the biggest European country. It's also one of the richer European countries. There's a question out there: how do we see to do it, not to lose the less fortunate countries when it comes to the cooperation? You want to say something about that?
Yeah, I mean, we do have in the EOSC Association a task force that is called Upskilling Countries for EOSC. And I think, I mean, maybe that is something we need to look into it in a more, let's say, strategic way, and saying how can some of the, let's say, richer or countries or more advanced countries when it comes to development support the other countries. I mean, one very concrete example is we have 2 members from Moldova, for example, in the association, and they want to stay within the community because it's important for them. And I think for those countries and for those members, we have to come up with smarter solutions in how we can link them to the developments that are happening, let's say, in the more western part of Europe.
This is also a task for German research organizations, let's say for, again, Helmholtz, Max Planck, or even for the NFDI as an umbrella, to work together with countries that don't have the economic resources to build up infrastructures like that. Jörg,
it's a tricky and political question, in fact. And like to project it first to Germany back, but I'm coming back to the international level. But also in Germany, we have federal states, and we have different levels of, let's say, engagement and money spent into such research infrastructures. So we also have different levels. And there we, as NFDI, have one of the tasks to bring them together and to create an atmosphere where politics and research is willing to co-create services that bridge boundaries. And we need both. We actually need a number of actors. We also need politics because also federal states say, why should I pay for a service which is being used by different federal states in Germany? It's a question sometimes being asked, luckily not too prominently, but once in a while it shows up. And therefore we need to create an atmosphere where it is understood that we as Germany benefit from having a strong research system where we also have leaders and we have followers, you could say. And the leaders have a certain responsibility also to support the followers so that we as a total can act as the German state. And if we do this very well, then maybe, hopefully, with the support of our government, we can maybe play such a role also in the international context.
Andrea Hedding, what's the responsibility of Germany in that regard?
Well, I wanted to make a slightly different point concerning both the governance, the current governance of EOSC and a potential I see, because this exchange, there is exchange in the steering board between the member states. There is this exchange on the level of the national tripartite events between the EOSC Association and the national community. But what could be stronger is the link between countries and moderated by the EOSC Association. I see a role there to improve the exchange between bilateral, trilateral in certain areas. Perhaps start small and then make it bigger.
Roland Pettermann, I know that Helmholtz is working with international partners on those issues. Maybe you can give us an example.
With international?
Yeah, with international partners. When it comes to research data.
Where to start and where to end it's a question. I think on first hand, just remember that one of the missions of Helmholtz is to supply research infrastructures to communities. And if you read it by this, Helmholtz is on research data as a mission, as all these research infrastructures generate data. If you take the synchrotron things out there, and if you go there, there's of course, there's an EOSC project, expands, there is an NFDI project, Daphne, and these are possibilities to connect. But of course, all these, if you go back years, many, many years back, just in this synchrotron community, there is collaboration on research data since you can remember many, many years. And so it goes far beyond NFDI and EOSC. And I think, again, the interesting thing is, just to come back with the new kids on the block, how can we bring these new kids on the block in a good role to expand things, to collaborate on different levels, and really, again, to interconnect with things which are existent. Just for an international, so you have, if you go into the earth sciences, we all know that earth sciences are a subject which is somehow advanced in terms of research data. And of course, if you talk about climate and things, it's an international collaboration on research data, on metadata, on standards and everything. So the world is much more broad and bigger. And seen from the Helmholtz level, I think that's an interesting point. And as I said, and I think that's again a point I would like to bring in here. We have now communities. We are building communities in Germany with NFDI, and I think that's really a great approach. Communities with discipline specific. But if you look back, there are persons behind, on first hand, and these persons are located in institutions. And institutions have interests, institutions have resources, but institutions have also restricted resources. And to bring this discussion we have on EOSC, on NFDI communities, connect this with the institutions, I think that's really the most important point. And that brings us again in a situation then we also can help on an international level other countries which start at another point.
Raphael, would you like to add to that from the Max Planck perspective?
Well, the Max Planck Society, being a basic research organization, I would say almost by definition acts internationally and international collaborations. But it varies across disciplines. I mean, the examples that Roland mentioned from the physics or natural science communities, their large consortia and big joint efforts are commonplace since decades, not the least because the machinery needed, accelerator labs, observation devices, telescopes or so, are so expensive that you can only afford one or very few instances and the world needs to cooperate on those. In other disciplines where this pressure does not exist, the situation is oftentimes not as advanced when it comes to European or international collaboration. And there it is very much up to the specific communities and individual researchers, in fact. I mean, at the end of the day, it's people who do this, and people have different interests, different attitudes, different ways of working, and that's fine. I think we need that diversity, but you also see that reflected in different institutes engaging in different ways at the European or international level, some more, some less, and so you have the full spectrum, essentially.
Ute Gunzenheimer, can the EOSC Association help there somehow also to to bring maybe partners together that economically stronger partners can help others that are not that strong?
That is, I mean, what I think already addressed in the previous answer, but what I would like to get back to is how can we better collaborate, let's say, on a national level. And there, I really think, I mean, we've looked into our own statistics or analytics, so we have 64 people who are in our task forces, and they're spread out in all the 13 EOSC Association task forces being affiliated to German organizations. We have to make use of that in a smart way, because what I didn't know even with your sections, that you have groups of 10 subgroups basically that somewhat also mirror what's happening in our technical advisory group. So, and we have to find a smart way of how those people first of all know from each other that they are in two camps at the same time, and how we can work together so that we have to do, let's say, some of the processes only once, and that it, achieves the same goals that we have in mind. So that's one thing. And I mean, for the association, let's say, mediating or facilitating the collaboration between different players. I mean, we do have now in Horizon Europe the opportunity to directly interact with the newly funded projects. And for that, we have established a kind of collaboration framework that we have put also in a document that we call a vademecum, and we have created a platform for that. And there we want to make sure that the projects talk to each other and benefit from each other's development, because that has hardly happened under Horizon 2020 projects. So that's one thing. And I think those projects and our task forces, they're eager to share their own, let's say, aspirations and also ideas with each other, but also with what's going on a national level. And if we find a good way there to connect all the dots, then we're there. I mean, it's a people business, and we have to facilitate that people talk and work together.
Thank you so much. There's also some talk about money in the audience again. Isn't it also a lot about funding for services? Isn't there a risk that NFDI and EOSC expect funding to come from the other, and in the end there is no funding at all? This is also a little bit connected to the sustainability question. So obviously there is not an infinite amount of money out there on the different levels that we're talking about. And how do we work that out? And I'm not sure who would like to start with it. Who's the most independent here in that regard?
I could at least mention that in the association we have a task. So we established a task force for that, of course, and it's called the Task Force on Financial Sustainability. And they have just published, and you find it on our website, their first progress report. And they have invited for feedback the community for that. And I think, indeed, this is one of the core topics to understand, I mean, what will it cost and who's supposed to pay for it? And that is tricky. And I guess that we all have to deal with it and have to better understand the numbers before then. And this is what we're also working towards before we shape the future, and that where the member states and the Commission want to jointly commit to the future after 2027.
So let's hear Jörg Suhre-Vetter about that. I mean, at NFDI you also had some money issues this year, or you were a little bit afraid that there might not be as much funding as you need. So money is always an issue when it comes to that.
Money is an issue, of course. And luckily we got the backing from politics. You all know it probably, that we finally have the third round coming into stage. So you could say we are in plan, which is very good, despite the fact that this year is very challenging from many respects for all of us, and we are well aware of that. So we are very grateful for this decision. But I wanted to come back to your question, what about this money? Where does it come from? And we have a process for that, which is built into NFDI as well. And this is what I think is important. I do not yet see it on the European level, so maybe we can have this exchange. And the process is that we have a certain trust which is given to our organization, and the trust is explicated by a 10-year funding. This is quite a good funding actually for research projects on the one hand. On the other hand, for an infrastructure, it's too limited, right? So and I always see it as we have to show that we are worth the money, you could say, from a certain perspective, and that we can create a perspective which is then funded substantially. This is my point of view. Maybe not everyone is sharing it. We are still working convincing politics to adopt that view. However, I think we need to show that this all makes sense. But if we can show this, then please take the courage and give us a long-term perspective for that, because otherwise we are creating what we call in Germany a Strohfeuer. And this would be really a waste of energy in this case.
I mean, generally speaking, I consider this an unsolved question and actually one of the big challenges ahead of us. But on the other hand, we do have examples where things actually already work quite nicely since years. If I think of EduRoam and its sister EduGain, you may say, there the idea is that institutions provide access to resources, in that case the local network, based on the promise and expectation that members of the institutions, if they go elsewhere, also get granted this privilege, namely access to the network. So without actually at that level any money flowing, based on trust, it is possible to establish a distributed infrastructure for the benefit of all. Now you may ask, why don't we have that in other places then, if this is possible? Truth be told, when it's about network access, network needs multiple participants to begin with. And in that sense, it's already inherently different from storage or compute resources, let's say. But why not think in that direction that I grant you, now talking from an institutional perspective, I grant colleagues from other institutions access to my IT infrastructure based on the trust that my fellow scientists are getting the same privileges if they go there. And we start seeing that to a certain extent also here in the context of research data, when we take compute also into account. What's gaining more and more attention recently is to publish data not only as such, but also in conjunction with code that can be used to work with the data, analyze it somehow, visualize it. A very popular means for doing so are notebooks, the IPython or now Jupyter notebooks being probably the most prominent examples. And with those technologies, it's actually possible to publish data in the context of a notebook so that a scientist, by simply pointing his or her browser to an appropriate URL, you get a fully functional environment where you can actually then start to explore the data and repeat the analysis, modify it, and start asking your own questions. There's a whole bunch of questions behind that, how you actually manage that in a responsible way, but that's what we are currently working on.
And I'm really thankful that you pointed out again the idea or the importance of mutual trust. And this is certainly something where working together in NFDI and EOSC helps a lot. And this is something where we also can develop mutual trust when it comes to financing things back and forth and providing services for them.
I would like to add one important point. If we talk about mutual trust for services, we are again on the level of institutions, as the institutions provide this. And there I see need for the discussion in NFDI and EOSC, how better integrating institutions in the whole game. Because if we look on NFDI was funded for staff, for persons, for people, not for infrastructure. There's rare money for infrastructure and it was not the idea to fund infrastructure. I would like to remind that Jörg Surefetter mentioned that, of course, there are another initiatives out, for example, HPC community and things like this, and it's important to connect all this. But again, then we come back to the institutions, and I think that's one of the keys we have to work on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. So thank you also to the audience for all your comments and questions. I think that's really impressive how much you like to share with us. And there's one issue in some of the comments that we haven't touched so much. You just touched it in the end, people, staff. We're basically talking about people who have to get involved in both NFDI and EOSC, and we already heard about all the task forces, all the councils, all the different ways of boards where people can get engaged, but there are only so many people out there. And the question would be, how do we deal with the limited number of people who can get involved? And obviously there's always the same people who get involved, you know, it's always the same people taking on more and more roles. So that could lead to a situation where some of them at some point maybe just can't stand it anymore. It's just too much, you know. So we have to find more shoulders to put it on. And the question would be, how can we excite or bring the excitement that is here to more people out there in the research community, that more people like to take on those roles and to engage themselves in building up NFDI and also EOSC. So what can we do about that? How can we deal what can we do about making more people so much excited about it, Jörg Sulvetter?
Well, first of all, have great events where you have the moderation task and raise these questions. So this is one of the contributions, right? Going public, you could say. And this is one of the things we do on the EOSC level as well as on the NFDI level. And we have introduced our sections, and one of the sections is called Education and Training. So we clearly have in mind to stimulate and to engage with younger people who are in the process of becoming maybe researchers, and maybe later on becoming also research infrastructure employees, maybe having important roles and so on and so forth. And I think we win if we create a generation of researchers that has in the DNA that data sharing is beneficial, that it is useful to share not just thoughts and publications, but also research data. We already see that they are collaborating internationally very strongly, so I think if we can make the point good enough and show the benefits, then it will take some time, of course, and effort, but then we create an atmosphere where this is just the new normal. And this is why we have things like education and training, where we try to go into the broad, you could say. It's not just the depth, it's also the width that we have to address. And coming back to one of the comments, it's also about linking to the individual institutions and organizations, and that would be like the universities, for example. At the end of the day, we have this pyramid where EOSC seems like on top, seen from an international perspective. And then we have NFDI, we have consortia, we have sections. And at the end of the day, we have the individual university, Helmholtz Center, Max Planck Institute, Fraunhofer Institute, Leibniz Institute. And there, the people need to be convinced. And that is why we need to have means to address the individual level as well. And this goes with education and training, this goes with public events, and this goes also with funding for the right tasks. We need some more funding for this task.
Yeah, just go ahead.
Actually, we're doing additional things in the field of data literacy. And first of all, data literacy has been a prominent topic in all parts of the tripartite organization. The steering board has discussed about this. It has been an issue in the task forces and also in the section. So it's not a new topic. And what we are doing from the ministry side is also we have grants to improve data literacy. We create data competence centers, and we'll start the first preparatory projects very soon. We have also 2 other lines of funding which try to bring data literacy to young researchers and to also to push the boundaries to new areas, to new fields of science which are not so much data savvy as the other ones. And a third direction in which we are going is to integrate our universities of applied science, because there's a huge potential as well, and more integration in those direction is important as well.
I would like to add 2 points maybe. On the first, in a start we talked about complexity. And yes, we have the point that always the same people sit in a lot of groups, task forces, working groups, whatever. And maybe EOSC and NFDI could look forward to reduce at their level a bit complexity and make the workload easier for responsible persons on the one hand. But on the other hand, I would look into the future, because as a person who is since 2 decades now in the research data business, I think the minds are really changing now. And that's a good point for the future on one hand. And it's not only the young people coming in, and it's definitely a real change now with the young people. And also again with NFDI, it's a network of people there. And if we look around in the consortia, I don't know the real number of how many people are now engaged within the consortia.
Over 800?
Wow. Yeah, something like this.
Wow.
And this means there are a lot of new people in the game and business. And
so 800 is a lot, but then again we have more than 100,000 researchers.
Yeah, and that's my point. Coming back to open science, we started with open science and cultural change, and research data being one of the pillars there, beside open access and research software, in my view. And I think in the end, we do this for science, we do this for scientists, we do this to promote digital transition of scientific work. And we shouldn't forget this. And I think we are already on a way for this cultural change. Indeed, all the young scientists coming in are starting just from another point than scientists coming into the business, let's say, 15 years ago.
Yeah,
and that makes hope.
May I make a little comment here? Infrastructure is successful if it's invisible, if it runs, right? This is one of the issues. And we are now currently in a stage where we have to make visible what kind of efforts are there to get enough funding and to have the means and atmosphere to approach the next stage where this becomes again invisible. And then we are known for good services who are there and who are used by researchers who just say, I can do my work, I can focus on my research questions, and I have the infrastructure that supports me in solving my research questions. This is the ultimate goal that we want to achieve. But I think in the meantime, we have to create awareness that this infrastructure is maybe more fragile, maybe not as sophisticated as we need it, so we need to work on that. And therefore we need large parts of the research community also to have a focus on that and to share with us what are their needs, what is running well, and also a certain, how should I say, an interest in experimenting with new stuff. Because what we need to identify is what is it what research needs in the next 5 to 10 years. And if we talk to people, for them it's sometimes difficult to express that. So we both jointly have to find out what is needed in 5 to 10 years, to say the least. And coming back to Karel's 2050, it becomes even more tricky. 40, yeah. It becomes even more tricky. The vision is nice, of course, but what do we need to realize such visions? And therefore we need the co-creation of research and infrastructure. And that is why we have NFDI and EOSC. Coming back to that, why we need both.
Interesting that you pointed out 2040, not 2050, because there was one comment that will lead us also in a final round, maybe a recap of our discussion. Wouldn't it make sense to be more agile with respect to the intended goals and bring solutions to the scientists more quickly, or do Google and Amazon, or otherwise Google and Amazon will bring the practical solutions? So obviously there's also the expectations, be quick with what you're doing. There was also another question, not always look for the best solution out there, but manageable solutions. Don't invent everything just from scratch. Just take what's there, what's good, and use it. Obviously, speed is an issue out there. So let's maybe go into the final round of questions. And there was one that was only addressed to Ute Gunzenheimer and Jörg Suhre-Vetter, but I would like to ask all of you this question. From this event today, what will you take back to, in this regard, NFDI and EOSC Association? But I could also ask, what will you take back to the BMBF? What will you take back to Helmholtz and to Max Planck? After 3 hours of this event, what are the lessons learned from your point of view, Raphael? And then we just go the whole way.
Now, taking my Max Planck hat, I think one take-home message for me and my hosting organization is it's time to get on board. And as a matter of fact, the Max Planck Society, for a number of reasons, has been somewhat reluctant in joining these efforts as an organization. And that may change. Actually, as a matter of fact, tomorrow will be the inaugural meeting of a Max Planck internal working group dedicated to NFDI, and in that context, I would also assume EOSC. So I have some hope we'll get there.
So get on board. Mm-hmm. Ute Gunzenheimer, what will you take back to the EOSC Association?
Yeah, this was just the beginning. I mean, so we need to come back to Germany and then have a meeting where also the community is physically present if, I mean, the framework conditions allow that. I think that's the thing. And then also that we start in a coordinated manner, I mean, to embark in the discussions about the future, because we have done that on a European level already, that the association with the member states and with the European Commission has, let's say, kicked off the discussion about how do we get to the future for a time after Horizon Europe. And I think there on a national level there should be a good contribution to that, to understand what is needed in order to make it easy for the member states to commit to the future of EOSC, and what is the German contribution to that. So I would say, yes, that's just the beginning, and then it has to be this, I think also maybe some of the lessons could be to meet in smaller circles where the experts meet, so that we bridge between your sections and working groups and our task forces, and have topic-specific activities that needn't be in person, they can be online, but that people start to get to know each other and work together.
Thank you so much. Roland Bertelmann.
Questions on Helmholtz, and I think maybe with all the colleagues out there, we are already in a process of discussing all these issues on a Helmholtz level. We have these incubator platforms, we have NFDI, we have EOSC, and a lot of more initiatives, and we are in a deep discussion already how to bring all these things together, as we are an organization with 18 big centers. 19? 19, yes, thanks. Sorry about that.
You're growing.
Yeah, we are growing. And the centers are also very autonomous. And I think that's one important point. We are already talking with each other, and maybe we can take the event today as a starting point for further discussions.
Thank you so much.
And connecting them.
Andre Hedding, what will you take back to the BMBF?
Well, first of all, it was a very good and intensive discussions, and it brings, it's good to have this started in this format. I bring back a reinforced impression that it's good to be committed to both initiatives, to NFDI and to EOSC. We have the upcoming evaluations in both settings. So this is a chance to look at how complexity can be reduced, how what is necessary to find sustainable solutions, and also I have a question or a task for all of us is to produce good examples. What is working to make it to make visible what we are doing.
Thanks so much. And finally, Jörg Suhre-Vetter.
Yeah, first of all, I take home It's so cool to have physical meetings. It's so cool to have a virtual audience at the same time, and maybe in future we benefit more from that. And content-wise, I thought this was really a very fruitful discussion. And it's, I think, again, a sign that we need to have these different actors on one table, from research infrastructure to research to funders, from the national level to the European level. These are the actors that we need to have not only these discussions, but also to solve the problems that are ahead of us. So coming back to the initial question, why do we need both? We need both, as hopefully the discussion also showed, to understand how to link people and services, and to understand how to link funding from national and international levels, and how to engage communities. For the communities, it's actually the easiest task, because they say research is global. Most of my colleagues work somewhere else, so they don't need to be convinced. And they are the ones who have the requirements that the infrastructure follows that, form follows function, you could say, that the infrastructure follows these needs. And that is why I think, yeah, maybe we should repeat this. Also, we should take the lessons back. I also have some homework from this for today, so I certainly noted it down. I will work on that, and I would be very happy to continue the discussion with you and with the communities outside in the upcoming meetings.
Thank you so much. Thank you all here on the panel, and thank you so much in the audience, because as Jörg Surevetter just said, obviously you delivered, or you provided all of them with some homework. That's good, because this was also the idea of the event, that we just not only say everything is great, everything is beautiful and wonderful, and it's great that NFDI and EOSC are there already, but to make even better use of both of them and of the possible collaboration between them, the linkages. And I think what was very clear today is that there is a need out there in the research community for them, for NFDI and EOSC to work together, not to build up parallel structures, but to know what's out there, to work together. And this is something that was very clear today, and I think this is the homework for all the actors on the different capacities, to make sure that NFDI and EOSC move ahead together, jointly, together with all the other national initiatives that are there. And so thank you so much for being with us today, here again, the panelists. Thank you for being with us, all the people who were giving presentations and impulse lectures. And again, most of all, thank you for being with us as a very actual, it was a virtual audience, but you were a very active virtual audience. So it was almost like you were here with us. Thank you so much, all the best, and take care.